Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Tonight, I have another Dump the Corruption show for you. When I've been going over electoral contests in 2022, I've been looking at the outside spending that's been going on in the various campaigns. And that's fine, but I haven't really addressed before the overall scale and types of outside spending that are now allowed in campaigns. I thought it would be very interesting both for me and for you to cover that. Okay. So I expect Dee Pierce is going to be here in a minute. She, of course, is the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, and I believe she intends to join me in just a minute. But meanwhile, I think I'm going to take a second to share this on Facebook. If I can get this on Facebook, what happened? My Facebook should be up, but I don't see it. Still don't see it. Okay. Dee is here. I'm going to let her in. Hi, Dee.
Hello. I am doing good. I received a comment in one of the chats that I shared to the show, and I was told that I was that I didn't get it with RFK Jr. I guess I was off the mark. It was stated just because of the Israel comment. It was said that he's anti-corporate, he's anti-war, and this person said, I don't want to give up names away all the time, said that they were voting in the primary for Kennedy and then in the general for Cornel West. But from what I see, he's taking corporate.
Oh, Kennedy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he seems to be taking money from any source he can get it.
Right, and that's where his stance on healthcare is concerned, because there is that lobby there.
Well, there are lobbies in all the other areas too.
Yes, there is. There's healthcare.
Really? Okay, he doesn't seem to be afraid of pissing off the lobbies in various kinds, of corporate areas, but he seems to be afraid of pissing off the lobbies when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to Israel. So he seems to be selective in his fear of pissing off the lobbies. Which is okay. It might make sense for him. He's basically saying, well, I can't really piss off all the lobbies, so I'm going to select the lobbies that I intend to piss off, and the others I'm going to steer clear of pissing them off. He might be making a judgment of that sort, but if he's going to prioritize in that way, then it's also true that voters who are looking at him may have priorities that are different.
Mhm.
In other words, they may have the healthcare priority and be angry at him, okay, for deciding that he's not going to piss off that particular lobby. Okay, or they may have a preference, with respect to thinking that Israel Palestine is one of the most important issues, and that he should be standing up uh, to APAC and to other organizations that are part of the Israeli lobby. Uh, but everyone makes their choices of which hill they want to die on,
Correct.
and our choices are not all, but going to be the same. Uh, okay, the thing that I'm annoyed at him about is that he doesn't want to die on the small donation hill. I mean, it seems to me, at least for the primary, uh, he can do very well as the small donation candidate. Certainly, Bernie Sanders proved that.
Yes, he
He
did.
raised $212 million by April of 2000, okay, and 20, when he dropped out. I think he dropped out in April. He might have dropped out in March even. Okay, so he still had quite a ways to go, okay, until the primaries ended. He probably could have ended with 275 to $300 million raised
Mhm.
for the primaries. So that's enough to get your message out, and it would have been enough for Bobby Kennedy if he chose to go that way. One advantage of running a campaign based on small dollar donations is, of course, that you also build your ground game that way.
He did. That's important to build the
And
ground game.
that's very important for getting votes in the primaries. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So he hasn't been so heavy when it comes to building his ground game that I've seen. I haven't seen yet that many solicitations from him for funds. He seems to be relying on the big money, already. So, okay, I think that's interesting. Okay, but let me go on here with the introduction to this show. I thought it would be interesting both for us, okay, and for you who are watching, to get some understanding of what the scale and the details of outside spending were in 2022. And maybe we'll even go back to 2020 also, because they were even larger in 2000, okay, and 20. And if we have time, there was also a good piece by Tom Hartman uh, on Donald Trump and what to do about the damage that he's been doing to democracy. I'm not sure we'll have time to get to that, but if we do, then we do. If we don't, then we won't. So, uh, for some reason, okay, I'm broadcasting to Facebook, but I didn't see the stream up on my Facebook page.
Okay, because it's online. It showed it. Let me see some. Because I just shared it. I saw it in my notifications.
Okay, well, I'm glad it's on yours. Oh, yeah, for some reason, I see, for some reason, okay, the thing about the duopoly in 2024 got shared, but got shared after this particular show. Okay, so I do see it, so that's good. So let me share it from my feed also. Okay, I did that. So I'll get rid of that now, and I'll share open secrets. I'll share their section on outside spending for the 2022 campaign. So, where it starts off is a January 2010 Supreme Court decision, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. That's the famous case. Permits corporations and unions to make political expenditures from their treasuries directly and through other organizations, as long as the spending, often in the form of TV ads, is done independently of any candidate. In many cases, the activity takes place without complete or immediate disclosure about who is funding it, preventing voters from understanding who is truly behind the many political messages. The spending figures cited are what the groups reported to the FEC. It does not account for all the money the groups spent, since certain kinds of ads are not required to be reported. See more on the reporting rules regarding outside spending. Well, I won't go there yet, but let's look at what some of the figures are that did get reported. This is total by type of spender. Now we're talking here about super PACs. And I don't think that includes carry committees at this point, because something else I saw today here, they distinguished between the super PACs and the carry committees. Anyway, in 2022, the total spending by super PACs was $1,365,427,889. That was what got reported spent. Number of groups that were registered was 2,476. Number of groups spending to date, 594. Social welfare groups, those are 501c4s, spent $24,773,718. I think we ought to look at the huge difference between the size of the super PAC spending and the size of the social welfare C4 spending. Then there's the trade associations. They spent $5,803,023. Those are 501c6s. There were only 8 of those groups. They spent $5.8 million. That's a lot of money, but not compared to $1.365 billion. I mean, the super PACs were just. Next was unions, 501c5 groups. They spent $6,597,036. I want to call your attention to the difference between that and $1,365,000,000. And then I want to go back up to the top again, and I want to point out that in the CU decision, Supreme Court was very careful to permit both corporations and unions to make political expenditures from their treasuries directly and through other organizations, as long as this was done independently of any candidate. The Supreme Court in that decision was somehow suggesting that, well, there are corporations on one side, there are unions on the other, and we're treating them both the same by permitting these expenditures, because surely the implication was surely the unions can be competitive in their expenditures with the corporate super PACs. Well, this is how badly the Supreme Court was bullshitting. It's right here in these figures. Unions can only produce $6.6 million in spending, whereas the super PACs did $1.365 billion in spending. This was, I'm talking about independent expenditures now, not tied to specific campaigns. The parties spent a healthy amount, $254,133,396. But this is dwarfed. That figure is dwarfed by the super PAC figure of $1.365 billion. Not even the parties could come close to the super PACs. Of course, someone is going to say, well, the super PACs were just engaging in free speech. The parties were just engaging in free speech. Well, that's true. But the point is, the people don't have access to that kind of free speech because we don't have $1.365 billion to do that kind of independent spending. Folks, money is not speech. Never forget that. And corporations are not people. Then there's the other category in which corporations, individual people, and other groups are included. That's $625,430,103. Obviously, that other category doesn't do us much good. We need to know how that is broken down, how spending by individual people, not to mention small donations by individual people, compares with the corporate donations and the other groups. Anyway, the grand total of outside spending in 2022 was $2.3 billion. Now, just briefly, this, of course, was for a congressional campaign. Briefly, I'm just going to go back to 2020 and show you what the total was there. It was $3.3 billion. Why was it so much more than the $2.2 billion? The reason was, of course, that was a presidential year. And the union spent more too. They spent $20 million. Small potatoes, again, compared to super PAC spending of $2.1 million. Okay, in that year. But we'll go back to 2022 now because I want to get into the detail there. So there is a little graphic somewhere here which gives a historical perspective on this. Okay, if you look at the outside spending, going back to 1990, you can hardly see the marks on the graph. Okay, during the 1990s. You can see them a little better in the first decade of the 21st century. But the spending does not become appreciable until 2008. That was before the Supreme Court decision, of course. By 2010, we see a little impact of the decision of the Supreme Court. I think it was in June of 2010 is when the decision of the Supreme Court came out. So there was a growth of outside spending between 2008 and 2010, probably grew to maybe 200 million altogether. But you don't see the impact of it really till the presidential election of 2012, where the outside spending grew to $1 billion. Those were, again, the independent expenditures. You see a drop in 2014 because that's not a presidential election year. It's cut almost in half to 549 million, still a very substantial sum. But then you see it going up, and you can see the comparison: $1 billion in 2012, $1.4 billion in 2016. In congressional year 2018, compare that 2014, $549 million compared with over $1 billion in 2018. But then when you compare 2016 to 2020, 2016 is $1.38 billion. In 2020, $2.88 billion, almost 3 times as much. And comparing 2018, $1.07 billion, with the congressional year of 2022, it was $2.02 billion, about twice as much. So you can see the numbers drastically increasing comparing presidential election year to presidential election year and congressional election year to congressional election year. With each cycle, we're seeing doubling. Whether it will continue to double in 2024, I don't know. If it does double in 2024, the amount of outside spending we're going to see is going to be close to $6 billion. So that's the kind of money we're dealing with here, an absolute flooding of the airways of independent expenditures coming from, not directly, of course, but coming from corporations, from other PACs, from party committees, all being fed into the super PACs to shape the environment, and often in the last weeks of campaigns to tell lies about the candidates. Certainly in the last weeks of primaries this is happening, and it was in the last weeks of the final campaigns also. Basically, the super PACs come in, tell lies about the candidates. The candidates have neither the financial wherewithal to answer, nor do they have the time, usually, to respond to the last minute smears that go on. So that has a tremendous effect on elections. It's massive scale, just massive, massive scale. And I think we're seeing that here. Okay, let's go on. If we look at the top groups, excluding party committees. Remember, we're still looking at independent expenditures. The Senate leadership funds in 2022, $246 million. Congressional leadership funds, $227 million. And the Senate Majority PAC, that of course is Democratic PAC at this point, $223 million. I don't know what the C stands for here. Maybe I can figure it out. I know the C could stand for conservative and the L for liberal, but I'm not sure that's it here. I got to see the key. Anyway, you can look at the scale of the spending. Those party affiliated groups, not the party committees themselves, but the leadership funds, was spending huge amounts in independent expenditures. Then we have a considerable drop when we go away from them and go to the Club for Growth. $81.4 million. Okay, also Americans for Prosperity, which is a well-known conservative group. It must be conservative, the C, because the Club for Growth is conservative. Americans for Prosperity, conservative. League of Conservation Voters probably would be classified as liberal. Women Vote also as liberal. The Wisconsin Truth PAC, conservative, but you can see the scale of the spending is very, very large. The United Democracy Project, that is the super PAC started, by AIPAC. Yeah, the C was conservative and the L was liberal. It's right down here. So that super PAC spent $26.1 million in the 2022 campaign. What did it use the money for? It picked on candidates, who were Democratic, looking for candidates who were, I won't even say sympathetic. In many cases, they were just being fair to the Palestinians. And this super PAC, the United Democracy Project, the AIPAC super PAC, would attack these candidates not because of their position on Israel. They wouldn't even mention Israel and Palestine. They would find smears that they could use against the other candidates in order to defeat them, in elections. Moreover, the super PACs, such as the United Democracy Project and other super PACs that came out of the lobbies, the Israeli lobbies, the money they collected and used to spend against people running as Democrats was often money that was contributed by large Republican pro-Israel donors. So that was a way for Republicans to interfere against people who were Democrats, both in primaries, okay, and in the general, okay, election. So I just wanted to make that clear. Here are the top races, excluding party committees. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, excluding party committees, $243,209,000 was spent in the Pennsylvania Senate. For the Democrats, there was $40 million spent. Against, okay, the Democrats, and we're talking now about John Fetterman and Dr. Oz, that race. That's what was in 2022. $81 million was spent against John Fetterman here. But I'm going to have to reduce the type on this because I want to see the figures on the right. Yeah, that gets me there. $24 million, I'm sorry, $24 million was spent for Dr. Oz by super PACs. Okay, did I say $24 million? Yeah, $24 million. Okay, against Dr. Oz, there was $98 million. So, 40 million and 24 million, $64 million worth of these ads was spent for a particular candidate, either John Fetterman, okay, or Dr. Oz. But almost 170 million out of the 243 million was spent on negative ads, either negative against Fetterman or negative against Dr. Oz. Of course, now Fetterman did better in the independent expenditures. His pro expenditures were 40 million compared to 24 million for Oz. His against, okay, was 81 million compared to 98 million for Oz. So Oz really took a drubbing in those independent expenditures when it came to the super PAC expenditures. In Georgia, those big Senate races, okay, in Georgia, okay, this is in the two Senate races, the one with John Ossoff and the one with Reverend, God, his name escaped me yesterday and today also. He's a pretty good senator, though. In fact, compared to the run-of-the-mill senators, both Ossoff and the Reverend have been pretty good senators. It's two Georgia senators. But anyway, total of 225 million in independent expenditures was spent in that race. 42 million against the Democratic candidates, 63 million for the Democratic candidates. On the Republican side, 44 million against the Republican candidates. That was really pretty equal to the Democratic figure. And when it came to what was spent for the Republican candidates. I'm sorry, I got the for and against there wrong. Okay, the for the Democrats was roughly 43 million, and the for the Republicans was roughly 44 million. The amount that was spent against the Democrats was 63 million, and against the Republicans was 74 million. So the Democrats got a sizable advantage in terms of the against money. But the monetary sums were huge. The 225 million is huge. In the Wisconsin Senate race, where Ron Johnson got a substantial challenge, 121 million in independent expenditures was spent there. That doesn't count the campaign contributions, doesn't count the party committee expenses. Okay. Of that $120 million for the Dems, 13 million, and for the Republicans, 24 million. And the amount in Wisconsin against, the Dem candidate was $50 million. And the amount against the Republican candidate was $34 million. So Ron Johnson had a tremendous advantage in the independent expenditures by super PACs. Okay, in the Nevada Senate race, I hadn't realized that was that expensive in independent expenditures. Okay, that's the one that I believe was won by Catherine Cortez Masto. 113 million was spent there. 20 million in favor of Cortez Masto, and only 8 million in favor of the Republicans. So she came in with a $12 million advantage there. But 47 million was spent against her, and 37 million against the Republicans. So Catherine Cortez Masto had a slight advantage in those expenditures. No, actually, she had a sizable advantage, in those expenditures. No, I take it back. It was a slight expenditure. In the against, she was negative 10 million. In the for, she was positive by 12 million. So she had a slight advantage in the end, but it was pretty even. In the Arizona Senate race, that's the one that was lost by Carrie Lake. If you recall, the Trumpist who was running for the Republicans. There was 108 million in outside expenditures in that race. 22 million for the Democrat, 21 million for the Republicans. That was pretty even, with the Democrat having a very slight advantage. And in the against column, 30.5 million against, the Democrat, 33.8 million, against the Republican. So the Democrat came out altogether with a net 4 million gain on that. But considering the scale of the money spent in the independent expenditures, it was fairly even. In the North Carolina Senate race, which was blown by the Democrats and won by the Republicans, 98 million was spent. 6.3 million for the Democrat, 25.3 million for the Republican. So the Republican had a huge advantage in that. And 42 million against the Democrat, only 24 million, against the Republican. So the Republican had a huge net in both the for and against independent expenditures categories in that campaign. In the Ohio Senate, where the Republican won, 95.7 million was spent in independent expenditures, 3.9 million for the Democrat, 25.8 million for the Republican. So that's a 21 million net in favor of the Democrat. In the against column, it was closer. It was 35.3 million against the Democrat, only 30.6 million against the Republican. So the Republican had a 26 million net in Ohio, which accounts for the victory of the Republican Senate candidate. In New Hampshire, in that particular Senate race, 50 million in independent expenditures was spent in that particular race. Almost 4 million in favor of the Democrat, 17.5 million in favor of the Republican. So the Republican had a big advantage there, but 10.6 million against the Democrat, 17.8 million against the Republican opponent. So the Republican opponent had a big advantage in the for column, and a not so big disadvantage in the against column. So the Republican benefited from the independent expenditures in that race. In the Alabama Senate race, there was 32 million in independent expenditures. There was zero spent for the Democrat and zero spent against the Democrat in that race. 16.6 million was spent for the Republican, but 15 million was spent against the Republican, which is, I think, a little bit of a surprise. In the Colorado Senate race, 31 million was spent in independent expenditures. That was 2.1 million for the Democrat, 3.1 million against the Democrat, 6.2 million against the Democrat, and 20 million against the Republican. The Republican candidate was much more unpopular, and you could see that in the independent expenditures that were coming out. There's a view all races button here. I'm pushing just to see what I get. I'm not sure what I'm going to get on that. But there were some house races that were awfully expensive. And so I thought there might be some useful information there. In the Michigan, okay, in the Michigan District 7, Congressional District 7, there was 26.6 million in outside spending in that race, which is real unusual for a House race. And 1.87 million was spent in favor of the Democrat, 2.6 million in favor of the Republican, 11.3 million against the Democrat, and 10.8 million against the Republican. So the Republican had slight edges in both the for and against part of the independent expenditures. In Virginia, District 7, almost the same amount of money was spent as in Michigan, District 7. 4.5 million was spent for the Democrat, 2.2 million for the Republican, 9.8 million was spent against the Democrat, and 10.0 million against the Republican. So the Democrat had slight advantages in both areas. Let's see if I can find out quickly who's running in the Virginia District 7 race. That was Abigail Spanberger's race. And she won. She did win. It was close, but she did manage to pull a victory out. But they were really trying to get her in that race. And she managed to survive. She's a conservative Democrat and a former CIA person. I'm going to check on Michigan District 7 also, because that one might have been the other CIA candidate or another CIA candidate, specifically Alyssa Slotkin. Yes, it was Alyssa Slotkin's race. And she won.
Okay.
Yeah, she won. But she won. But it's interesting that those races were so expensive in spending, with the Republicans targeting former CIA agents to try to take back the seat. Here's California District 22. 3.6 million in favor of the Democrat, 2.3 million in favor of the Republican. But there was almost 12 million against the Democrat in California District 22 in independent expenditures, and there was 8 million against the Republican. So in outside expenditures, the Republican had a small net advantage, but The Republican did have a net advantage in that race. Let me see if I can find my cursor here. For some reason, I've lost control of the cursor and find out who was in that race, because that was among the biggest spending races also in 2022. Okay, and we're looking at, by the way, the biggest spending in outside spending here. That was Rudy Salas versus the Republican was David Valadao. And if I'm not mistaken, Valadao won, but I can quickly determine that by looking at the summary page here for this. I'm sorry, not the summary page, the candidates page has the vote totals. Yeah, Valadao won with 51.5% of the vote. Okay. So, uh, going back to, well, there are a number of other races like this that were expensive. Uh, House races that were the most expensive races in the country. But I think I'm going to stop going over these now because I think I made my point. In a large number of the races, and we've been looking at them, even in House races, a huge amount of money was spent in independent expenditures. And those expenditures did have an effect on the races. Uh, I'll take back what I said just now, and I'll look at District 7 in Pennsylvania, because I think that's going to be illuminating. 849,653 for the Democrat. And 128,100 for the Republican. Against the Democrat in that race is 10,853,640. And against the Republican, 9.3 million, okay, in that particular race. Okay. I'm betting that was Summer Lee's race, where she was nearly beaten by the Israeli lobby, specifically by UDP contributions, DMFI contributions. Nope, I was wrong about that. That was Susan Wild's race. And as I recall, Susan Wild actually won that race. It's interesting they actually give the super PAC contributions here if one scrolls down. Okay, so going back, I guess I could do this for hours because I just love all the numbers and I'm real interested in this. Okay, 18 million was spent in the District 17 race. We'll see who that is. Maybe that's the Summer Lee race. Now that was Chris Deluzio's race.
Okay.
So that was a tough one also. Uh, I hadn't realized that the independent expenditures in that race were so high, but they were high. They were pretty even between the two candidates. In the against column and also in the for column. Okay, and the Republicans had a net advantage in that particular race, but it was very small. And Chris Deluzio raised a lot of money directly for his campaign. So he was able to win that race actually rather handily. I'm still kind of looking for a Pennsylvania race, but I don't have time. We could spend hours here, going over this stuff.
Yes, we could.
And I don't think we have the time to do that. So, uh, okay, I'm going to go back to where we were. There are breakdowns here, okay, in this page. Very interesting breakdowns. Classification of the independent expenditures by group. In addition to super PACs, which can raise and spend unlimited funds, and regular political action committees, which raise money via contributions capped at $5,000 per year, there are several other vehicles donors can use to attempt to influence elections. These include carry committees, also known as hybrid PACs, which maintain one account for making contributions to candidate, like regular PACs, and a separate account for making independent expenditures, like super PACs. In addition, there are 527 organizations and 501c nonprofit groups. The 527s can be entirely political and must disclose their donors. However, the 501c4 groups can shield their donors' identities, but under IRS rules can't have politics as their primary purpose, which means that of all their expenditures, they can spend only 49% of their money on politics, okay, directly.
Okay.
I think they have ways of getting around that, though, but I'm not going to go into those here. Uh, I thought it was interesting that if we look at the breakdown between conservative and liberal among these groups, conservatives uh, spend 55.47% of total spending, and liberals 41%. So the conservatives had a substantial gain in these areas, in the independent expenditures areas.
Hmm.
Uh, the groups are listed, okay, below. I'm not going to go into them because I don't have time, but this page is where to find them. But these breakdowns are very useful. For example, the next category is super PACs. It shows you that figure we saw before, 1.365 billion dollars was spent by super PACs, but super PACs raised $2.7 billion. So they came out of the campaign with $1.4 billion in their till, which they can spend in 2024. I think that's interesting. Again, they show a breakdown between the conservative super PACs and the liberal super PACs. That again favors the conservatives, this time by 61 to 35. So very significant, I think. And then again, below there's a listing for what all these groups actually spent. Again, I don't have time to go through these here, but I did want to show you what you can get. Uh, okay, if you go to Open Secrets and you approach it from the standpoint of 2022 outside spending by Super PAC, it covers not only Super PAC, it covers carry committees, which are distinguished from the Super PACs. They didn't spend as much as the Super PACs, but they did spend. Let's see, what's the amount again? 566,608,607,000. A whole bunch of money by the carry committees. About 40% of what the super PACs spent. Okay, remember the carry committees are flexible. They have one account for regular expenditures and another account for independent expenditures, like the super PACs. So they can be very potent indeed. Then there are single candidate super PACs. Super PACs founded to serve a particular candidate. For example, I think Bobby Kennedy has such a super PAC actually right now, where it was started by people to assist him. Of course, since super PAC, it can't give to his campaign directly money, but it can raise and spend all kinds of money in independent expenditures that support him. So anyway, I thought those breakdowns were very useful. I thought you should see that. I thought you should understand the scale of the spending so you can see how much money is sloshing around to buy candidates with. E-
Mm-hmm.
Even if the money doesn't go directly into their campaigns, they know the money is being spent on their behalf. And very often they might know or be able to find out after the election who their supporters were. We see, for example, in outside spending by group, we see the groups are identified. The candidates can make inquiries afterwards, and they can find out by having their staffs do research who the major contributors for these groups. Please notice that there are these big expenditures by the Congressional Leadership Fund, the House Majority PAC. Then it drastically falls off to the Protect Our Future PAC. Uh, I believe that's uh, actually not actually a PAC. They call themselves a PAC, but I believe the Protect Our Future PAC is a super PAC. Uh, I thought was interesting here was that there's a line item for the DMFI. If I can find it, that's the Democratic Majority for Israel. That was the group that did so much to defeat Nina Turner in her race against her two races against Chantel Brown. Okay, Democratic majority for Israel. Uh, Spent $7 million. I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, oh no, that's the independent expenditures versus the total raised. So DMFI raised $9 million and in 2022 spent 7.3 million dollars. So this is a very handy chart to actually get to the groups and see how much they spent. Okay, I guess that's all for tonight. I hope that you found this to be useful. We normally don't go into such detail with respect to the groups, but I think this should have had some impact for you because it made it clear, just how much money is going to be sloshing around in 2024 for super PACs to spend. If we look at the projections, uh, if we look at that graphic again, where is it? Yes. If the past K is prologue, we'll be looking at $6 billion in outside expenditures in the 2024 campaign. And it may even go higher than that because, well, it's been crazy lately how much money people have had to throw around for these particular races.
It is.
$6 billion, okay, in outside expenditures is likely for 2000, okay, and 24. And that's a huge amount of money. And the way things tend to work out, more money is spent on the conservative side that is spent on the liberal side. Uh, and we also have to realize that the money spent, okay, on the liberal side is not necessarily progressive money because the groups that are classified as being on the liberal side here are generally groups that are part of the establishment. There's almost no money spent on the progressive side. So I thought that point was an important one to make.
It is very important because we've covered the money issue and we just have to keep covering the money issue.
Yes, and we also have to make people aware just how much money it is we are fighting, and then that brings up the point, of course, or leads to the point.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Wilkman had a comment to make about the Buy Me a Coffee page. That Buy Me a Coffee page is a POS, only allows $5 donations. Sometimes doesn't even allow that. Fuck, I haven't studied that carefully. It seems like it was easy to make a donation there, but it may be easier to make a donation to Patreon. Uh, that doesn't have to be, a month by month donation. It could be one, but if you start off, okay, and make the donation, uh, and then you cancel it, like a week later or something like that, okay, then what happens is that instead of becoming a monthly donation, it just becomes a single donation. So you can give a single donation that way. Okay, anyway, the final point, okay, which I wanted, okay, to make about this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have the rule. Do I have the rule available tonight? Yeah, I do.
I was gonna say, usually you do have it right there.
Yeah, so let me put it up again. The reason why I think the rule is a very good way to approach this is because it's really relatively simple and you don't have to worry about all these details. Once you conclude that this huge amount of running money that's sloshing around in campaigns and gets essentially donated by these organizations to defeat candidates they're afraid of, because the candidates they're afraid of are the candidates who are really committed to change in some way, and usually changes that are good, okay, for all of us. Once you see that there are these hammers there waiting for candidates who really want to make change, and you realize that to use a rule like this and to make that money toxic, okay, is really essential. Now, it's a little harder to make the super PAC money and the carry committee money so toxic uh, because, of course, candidates can repudiate the support they're getting from the super PACs, but still the support is there. But if those candidates take out ads of their own to repudiate the super PAC support and say they can't do anything about it because it's free speech, okay, but they're against it, and you don't want people to listen to their ads, then that can be very, very powerful, actually, for a candidate. In other words, if candidates running on small donations want to smear super PACs supporting them, they can easily do it. And that would have a negative effect on the super PAC, a negative effect on it in terms of the donations that the super PAC is likely to get. If the candidate is not supporting the super PACs, then why should people be giving to the super PACs? So I wanted to bring up that point also. Uh, but I think you can see here there's so much complexity and so much money that I think there's really one way to beat it. You got to have a simple formula like this one. Everybody's got to unite around the simple formula and vote accordingly and then see what happens. Of course, this is a vote against formula. It's not a voting for formula. So any person who does that is going to have to decide who they're going to vote for. But if beforehand they've done, okay, a bit of research from Open Secrets and checked out if the person they're considering voting for is taking big money, which is very, very simple to do, really, uh, and they see the person is not, then they know that that's probably a good person to vote for, that that person is not bought by the big money. Has been talking about the hurricane, and he says, I'm worried about the homeless people camping by the river. They could be swept away. Yeah, I think that is possible, Steve. I think, okay, it's possible. Steve, I have to say the same of homeless are at risk of dying because of Hillary. Yeah, that's Hurricane Hillary in this case, as opposed to Hillary Clinton. Kay Ryan says, yes, they could, Steve. Yes, they could. Okay, folks, so thank you for coming.
That went by fast.
Yeah, that did go by fast, didn't it?
Yes, I mean, because you get into the numbers and all that. I mean, if you have an interest for that, it goes by fast. I'm sure everybody watching, yes, everybody's interested in this and wanting to know who gives to what and what's going on. So it does go by very fast when it's your
Right.
interest.
And I think people do want to know about the scale of the money
Oh,
because
definitely.
they're usually not aware of just how much money is going into this. And by the way, that apart from the likely $6 billion in independent expenditures, which is going to be spent in 2024, the direct spending on the campaigns is going to be comparable in size. So we're probably looking at $15 billion being spent on federal elections in 2024. It may indeed reach that level. And that, okay, is very important. Okay, I think that it may be time for us to say goodnight because I think one thing I would like to do is to call my daughter right now and make sure that she is as ready for the hurricane as she can possibly be, since, as many of you know, she lives in Los Angeles. She lives in Burbank, actually, which I think is a little further out, but I'm not really too clear on the geography there.
Hmm.
But I think she may be living in a safer area than Steve is.
Hmm.
Anyway, good night, everybody.
Good night. And I guess we should all be thinking about Steve tonight and sending positive energy and whatever we can, even
Yes.
though we're distance away, positive thoughts, energy, and your daughter as well, and everybody, along the coast there. It's scary. I know from living in Florida when you see that out there in the ocean coming towards you. It's pretty
Right.
scary.
Right. And also Los Angeles or Southern California, okay, the area around there, doesn't get very many hurricanes. This is a rare hurricane.
Mhm.
I mean, in Florida, they expect, hurricanes every season. So people
Right.
are, more or less prepared for it. But here in California, I don't think they are.
You just don't know where it's gonna go. The projected cost could be one thing, and then high temperature, low temperature, different things shift.
Yes, I agree.
I've watched it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. Uh,
All right, well, thank you.
have you lived in California?
No, I've lived in Florida, and I've
Right,
been in Florida where it looked
which
like
is
it was
worse
directly.
from the hurricane point of view.
Yeah, well, you pretty much you watch it coming in, and you could think it's gonna hit you, and people, you move and people leave the location just to find out that no, it didn't hit you. It hit a lower portion or a higher portion, of the state. And you know what I'm saying? As much as you could try to prepare, you don't know with the different shifts if it's gonna line up the way they project it to be. It shifts all the time.
Yeah,
And that's what people went into Orlando during one of the storms. I remember that because it was supposed to be not in that area at all, and it shifted and went to Orlando. And a lot of people went from the coastline where they were at into Orlando, thinking it was going to be safer. It's crazy.
yeah. Okay, well, I think I'm going to say good night. But please buy me a coffee if you can. Please occasionally go to my Patreon account. Please buy D a coffee. Okay, as well. We certainly
Hit the
like
like button.
coffees. Please hit
Yes, I
the
love
like,
coffee.
share, and subscribe buttons.
I guess everybody wants to say hi to your daughter when you talk to her on the phone. Say hello. Hello to everybody from the show.
Okay, I'll tell her.
And good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Good
Okay,
night. Listening
thank
to
you.
Bonnie. Good night.